Alright, so good morning everyone. Today I would like to talk about differential reinforcements. Actually, there are many things that can be done to reduce or eliminate problem or interfering behaviors. However, with the ethical concerns, there may be um, raised when using some of the techniques that help stop this behavior, like extinctions or punishments. These concerns have led the researchers to examine alternative procedures for addressing problematic behavior in an ethical and humane manner. These positive reductive techniques emphasize the use of the reinforcement to increase the occurrence of more adaptive or desirable behavior, and at the same time using extinction or elimination of triggers that help to decrease or eliminate disruptive behavior. These techniques is in place of reducing opportunities for additional reinforcement, removing the already acquired reinforcers, or applying punishment in response to unwanted behavior. So there are four procedures that incorporate reinforcement to address and treat the disruptive behavior. So today I'm going to talk about these four procedures in detail. So what are they? They are DRI, DRA, DRO, and DRL respectively. So let's go through one by one in detail. So what is differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior? The first, it delivers the reinforcement upon occurrence of a behavior that is physically incompatible with or cannot be exhibited at the same time as the inappropriate behavior. For example, if the interfering behavior is an inability to pay attention, then an incompatible behavior will be the ability to pay attention. There's another example. If it is desired to stop the child from running around out of a seat, then in-seat behavior is targeted and reinforced. The idea is that the target or replacement behavior cannot be performed at the same time as the problematic behavior. So, how about differential reinforcement of alternative behavior? It is actually similar to DRI in that both reinforce the occurrence of behavior that is an alternative to the behavior selected for reduction. However, the target behavior selected in DRA is not necessarily incompatible with the unwanted behavior. For example, a student who frequently engages in outbursts while in the classroom can be taught to raise his hands to gain the teacher's attention. In these procedures, hand raising and outburst can be done at the same time. However, it is likely that the student will make fewer outbursts and instead engage in a more appropriate attention seeking behavior, like raising his hands. So, if the target behavior is strengthened in both DRI and DRA procedures, it is important to select an incompatible or alternative behavior that already exists or is presented in the learner's repertoire of response that will facilitate additional skills building opportunities and that will support in the learner's natural environment that the intervention progress has earned. So, when the behavior are selected that are meaningful, relevant, and useful to the learner, these behaviors typically continue to be strengthened in everyday interactions and settings and with multiple social partners. There's also need to be considered is that whenever possible, the type of stimuli chosen to function as reinforcer should be the same reinforcer that currently support the unwanted behavior. If the external reinforcer is needed, then it is ideally a good idea to include the learners in the selection. This will increase the learners' motivations and cooperation with the intervention program. Equally important is that the reinforcement needs to be present only when the target behavior is performed consistently and immediately following the behavior and be as strong or stronger than the positive consequence, maintaining the interfering behaviors. Otherwise, the interventions program is likely to be ineffective in changing the learner's behavior. To adequately address this component, a functional assessment of behavior should be administered prior to conducting the differential reinforcement program to determine the functions of the interfering behavior and identify the stimuli that reinforce it. So, the next guideline for effectively implementing a DRI or DRO procedure is to establish a schedule of reinforcements that specifies how often to deliver the reinforcement. Initially, it may be necessary to deliver a continuous schedule of reinforcement in which every occurrence of the specified behavior is reinforced. So once the incompatible or alternative behavior is strengthened and occurring regularly, an intermittent schedule of reinforcement may be gradually introduced in which the reinforcement is not delivered during every time the target behavior occurs, but in a regular pattern, such as after every three occurrences. The final decision is to combine the DRI and DRA with other reactive procedures such as extension, functional communication training, or self-management to assist with learning. So the third procedure that I'm going to introduce to all of you is DRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior. Actually, it delivers reinforcement for any appropriate behavior whenever an undesirable behavior is not emitted during a specified period of time. So actually, there are a broad range of appropriate behaviors may be reinforced as long as the behavior selected for reduction does not occur. To apply it to DRO procedures, an interval of time is selected and any appropriate behavior exhibited at the end of that interval is reinforced, as long as the unwanted behavior did not occur. So if not, the reinforcer is not delivered and the interval is reset to try and bring out an appropriate behavior in a new interval of time. Most of the applications of DRO actually involved a fixed DRO schedule of reinforcement in which the interval of time remains the same across trials. For example, a fixed DRO of 1 minute means that reinforcement is delivered every 1 minute and contingently upon the absence of the unwanted behavior. Alternatively, a variable DRO schedule of reinforcement may also be used in which the interval of time is set to vary across the trials. For example, a variable DRO schedule might consist of 15, 30, 45, 60, and 90 seconds, etc., arranged to occur in a random order. And there are some guidelines to consider when implementing the DRO procedures. First, we have to select an initial DRO time interval that is short enough to yield frequent reinforcement for other appropriate behaviors. For example, if baseline data indicated the individual partially remains on task for 5 minutes before exhibiting disruptive behavior, then the time interval will be programmed at 4 minutes, while additional intervention techniques, say prompting, self-management, are also applied to promote learning. Secondly, the time interval between the reinforcements will be gradually increased as the learner's on-task behavior improves. So if the behavior appears to worsen when the larger DRO interval are used, then the size of the interval should be reduced until the behavior is again under control. Thirdly, reinforcement need to be provided at the end of the DRO interval only if the undesirable behavior has not occurred and a more appropriate behavior has occurred. For example, if the behavior select for reduction is yelling, the goal is for the individual to engage in a more acceptable behavior during the time interval, such as engaging in an incompatible behaviors, an alternative behaviors, or another behavior. So they are also be used in conjunction with other reductive procedures to increase its effectiveness, such as self-management, overcorrections, prompting, or extinction. So the next ones come to differential reinforcement of low risk responding, that is DRL. It aims to decrease but not eliminate the problem behavior. The rationale for using this approach is that the behavior itself is not the problem, rather, its frequency is. That means how often it occurs or the duration, how long it lasts, is difficult to tolerate. The most common way to use this approach is to establish a criterion limit for what is considered an acceptable rate or duration for the problem behavior. The learner is reinforced for not exceeding the limit. For example, if the learner engages in 8 acts of talking out loud during a 20-minute interval, in which the criterion is set at no more than 5 times, then the individual does not receive reinforcement. So now I'm going to talk about step-by-step instructions for implementation. So to use the differential reinforcement, first steps that we have to identify the interfering behavior. Of course, we have to define the target behavior. For example, such as screaming, aggression, repetitive or stereotypic behaviors that interfere with learning. These are the behavior that can be used with differential reinforcement. So in addition to identifying the specific behavior that is interfere with learning, we should gather the information from our team member regarding the following aspects I'm going to talk about. So first, we should pay attention to the topography or what the interfering behavior looks like. For example, like banging arms against the table. Also, we have to pay attention to the frequency, say how often the behavior happens, from once or twice per day, or to a dozen or more times per day. Also, intensity is an important symptom that we should also look into. That is how severe the behavior is. If the behavior is beating, so how hard does the learner bite, and does he cause the tissue damage? Also, locations where the behavior is occurring. Is it happens in the gym room all the time, on the playground, or during math class? Also, the durations, how long the behavior lasts. A tantrum that lasts a few minutes or that can last for an hour. These kind of information can be summarized to aid in assessment of possible functions of the interfering behavior. For example, knowing that Joey loudly shouts between 3-4 times for 30 seconds or more than that when in the lunchtime, provide a specific information about the interfering behavior that can be of value in planning the interventions. So step 2 would be to determining the functions of the interfering behavior. What does it mean? That means we have to use the functional behavior assessment to identify the functions of the interfering behavior. An important part of determining the functions of interfering behavior will